I'm Wallace Hendricks, 44 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've been a senior IT project manager at Meridian Tech, a Fortune 500 company specializing in technological solutions for the financial sector. My role has always demanded a high degree of precision, reliability, and strategic oversight. Over those years, I've led complex projects involving multi-million-dollar system integrations, cybersecurity frameworks, and compliance implementations. My reputation within the company and among our clients has been built on meticulous planning, thorough documentation, and calm, data-driven decision-making. I take immense pride in my work ethic and professional discipline. From the earliest days of my career, I learned that success in IT project management hinges not only on technical expertise, but also on clear communication and well-maintained records. Every contract, every milestone report, every budget revision was meticulously logged in both the company's systems and my personal archives. This habit of documentation wasn't just a safeguard against operational risks. It was a personal standard I lived by. That same rigor applied to my personal affairs, especially financial planning. Margaret, my wife of 12 years, and I had consolidated much of our wealth into retirement funds and other joint investments. Given the complexities of managing high-value assets, I made sure we had clear agreements in place, including a prenuptial agreement that outlined how assets would be handled under various circumstances. I also kept copies of all financial statements, legal contracts, and insurance policies. These documents were securely stored digitally and physically, ready to be accessed if ever needed. Then came the accident. I was admitted to the ICU after a severe car crash, an event that caught everyone by surprise, especially me. For days, I was unconscious or barely aware of my surroundings, hooked up to various monitors and life support systems. During that time, I was utterly dependent on the medical staff and unaware of the world outside those sterile hospital walls. When I finally regained enough clarity to check my phone, the first thing that caught my attention was a string of notifications from colleagues and friends. They weren't offering words of encouragement, as I had expected. Instead, the messages referenced a social media post that had gone viral overnight. My wife Margaret had publicly announced our divorce. The post read, "Life's too short to wait for someone who might not make it," a phrase that hit me harder than any physical pain. Almost simultaneously, I received alerts from my bank and retirement fund administrator. My entire $312,000 retirement fund had been liquidated without my consent. All of it, gone. It became clear that while I was incapacitated and vulnerable, Margaret had taken the opportunity to sever our legal and financial ties on her own terms, without notifying me or consulting me in any way. Instead of reacting impulsively or emotionally, I took a deep breath and said to myself, "Understood." This was a betrayal, but it was also a challenge, one that required a methodical, strategic response. My professional experience told me that the path forward would not involve confrontation or rash decisions, but rather an evidence-based approach. I needed to collect facts, understand the precise legal and financial mechanisms she had exploited, and prepare to counteract them with everything I had. My first step was to request detailed statements from the retirement fund trustee and review the timeline of transactions. At the same time, I began compiling screenshots of the social media post and its public reactions. I started drafting a mental map of the steps I would need to take, considering both the legal implications of the divorce announcement and the unauthorized fund withdrawal. My hospital records, showing my incapacitation, would be crucial to prove my inability to consent or participate in these actions. Throughout this process, I remained calm and focused, reminding myself that my 15 years of experience managing high-stakes IT projects had prepared me to handle complex, multifaceted problems with discipline and strategic thinking. This was no different. It was a system to be analyzed, vulnerabilities to be identified, and solutions to be implemented. At that moment, my priority was clear. Recover physically, then methodically dismantle the financial and legal damage Margaret had tried to inflict. I understood that this would be a long, arduous process, requiring patience, precision, and professional expertise. But I was ready. The betrayal was severe, but so was my resolve. Over the course of my 15-year tenure at Meridian Tech, I led numerous IT projects that cumulatively generated over $8.5 million in revenue. My specialization centered on cybersecurity systems, a critical domain for Meridian Tech, given its role in providing technological solutions to the financial sector. These projects were not mere technical implementations, but complex integrations involving cross-functional teams, stringent regulatory compliance, and safeguarding sensitive client data. My responsibility extended beyond technology. I was accountable for aligning project deliverables with business objectives, managing stakeholder expectations, and ensuring the integrity of every system we deployed. Each project I managed required exhaustive documentation, everything from initial project charters, risk assessments, and vendor contracts, to detailed logs of decisions made during development cycles. I maintained this documentation not just within the company's project management software, but also kept personal backups. These backups were organized systematically, categorized by client, project, and date, facilitating rapid retrieval whenever necessary. This habit stemmed from an early career lesson. In high-stakes environments, undocumented assumptions lead to costly errors, and without clear records, accountability suffers. Precision in documentation was not optional. It was the foundation of my professional reliability. In parallel, I cultivated strong, trust-based relationships with clients and internal stakeholders. Over time, consistent delivery and transparent communication earned me a reputation for dependability. This trust was critical when I navigated complex system upgrades or remedial cybersecurity measures. I also earned 3 promotions during my tenure, reflecting both my technical acumen and leadership capabilities. Those promotions brought additional responsibilities, including oversight of compliance with federal cybersecurity laws and coordination with legal teams to ensure all contracts met regulatory standards. My meticulous nature extended beyond work into my personal financial management. Margaret and I had consolidated our assets thoughtfully, primarily into retirement funds and diversified investment portfolios. Recognizing the vulnerability of joint assets in the event of marital discord, we had a prenuptial agreement drafted early in our marriage. This agreement detailed how assets would be managed, protected, and distributed under various future scenarios. I insisted on retaining copies of all legal documents, financial statements, and insurance policies related to our joint assets. These were stored both digitally on encrypted drives and physically in secure locations. This foresight was a protective measure intended to preempt disputes or misunderstandings. Margaret was, for the most part, aware of these arrangements. However, the complexity and depth of my documentation and the legal protections embedded in our agreements were, as I would later realize, beyond her full comprehension. This gap in understanding likely contributed to her underestimation of the legal safeguards in place. From a professional standpoint, every precaution I had taken was a calculated hedge against unforeseen personal risks, ensuring that neither of us could act unilaterally with impunity. This professional discipline and attention to detail became invaluable after my accident. When I was admitted to the ICU, unconscious and vulnerable, I had no control over my personal or professional affairs. Yet, because of my prior habits, I was able to systematically piece together a timeline and evidence trail once I regained consciousness. The financial and legal frameworks I had established before the accident provided a roadmap for assessing the damage and formulating a response. Even more importantly, my reputation as a methodical, evidence-driven professional influenced the way I approached what could have been an emotionally overwhelming situation. Rather than reacting with anger or despair, I applied the same analytical rigor I used in managing high-stakes IT projects. I began building a chain of custody for every piece of evidence: bank statements, social media posts, hospital records, legal contracts, all collected with careful annotations regarding their origin, dates, and relevance. This process underscored a fundamental truth I had learned in my professional life. Success in complex situations depends on preparation, documentation, and disciplined execution. Whether managing multi-million-dollar cybersecurity systems or safeguarding one's personal assets amid crisis, the principles remained consistent. My 15 years of experience had not only shaped my career, but had fortified me to navigate this personal betrayal with a level-headed, systematic approach designed to protect what was rightfully mine. Margaret Hendricks was 42, just 2 years younger than me, and over the course of our 12-year marriage, I had come to understand her as a complex blend of ambition and impatience. Professionally, she worked as a financial consultant, which gave her a surface-level familiarity with investments and asset management. But her approach tended to prioritize short-term gain over long-term strategy. During my unexpected ICU stay, when I was incapacitated and completely unable to intervene, she seized the opportunity with a calculated urgency that revealed her true motivations. It quickly became clear that her decision to publicly announce our divorce via social media was not just a spontaneous emotional reaction, but a deliberate move to expedite the separation process on her terms. The post she published read, "Life's too short to wait for someone who might not make it," a message crafted to frame the narrative in her favor and justify her abrupt actions to friends, family, and colleagues. This public declaration was strategic. It served to pressure me and others into accepting a fait accompli, circumventing the usual private legal proceedings that would have required my input and consent. But Margaret's ambitions extended far beyond a social media announcement. Shortly after posting the news, she orchestrated the liquidation of our entire $312,000 joint retirement fund. This was no ordinary transaction. It was an unauthorized, unilateral move that directly violated the terms laid out in our prenuptial agreement. That agreement, drafted carefully years before to protect both our interests under various contingencies, explicitly prohibited either party from liquidating joint retirement assets without the other's knowledge and written consent. Margaret's action was not just a breach of trust, it was a breach of contract. Equally alarming was her attempt to claim $48,500 in disability benefits, ostensibly on my behalf, while I was still hospitalized. The disability insurance policy we had maintained required continuous employment verification and active participation in the claims process, conditions I was obviously unable to fulfill due to my medical condition. Margaret, either unaware of these stipulations or willfully ignoring them, submitted a claim that lacked the necessary documentation. This attempt to access funds under false pretenses crossed into fraudulent territory. Margaret's oversight here was critical. She failed to account for the legal and procedural safeguards embedded not only in our prenuptial agreement, but also in the disability insurance contract. These documents were not mere formalities. They represented legally binding protections designed to prevent precisely this kind of exploitation. Her impatience and greed blinded her to these safeguards, and that underestimation would prove to be a significant strategic error. Recognizing the complexity of these overlapping legal and financial issues, I knew I needed expert assistance. I reached out to David Cole, a seasoned attorney specializing in employment and family law, with a proven track record in cases involving marital asset disputes and insurance claim litigation. David's expertise was critical because Margaret's actions touched on multiple legal domains: contract law regarding our prenuptial agreement, insurance law governing disability claims, and family law concerning divorce procedures. From the outset, David and I agreed that our approach had to be methodical and evidence-based. We could not afford to rely on emotional appeals or rushed judgments. Instead, we needed to dissect every document, transaction, and communication with precision. David immediately began reviewing the prenuptial agreement's clauses related to asset liquidation and fiduciary duties. He analyzed the disability insurance policy's requirements for claim validity, focusing on employment verification and claimant cooperation. He also examined the timeline and content of Margaret's social media announcement, recognizing its potential impact on public perception and legal proceedings. Throughout our initial consultations, David emphasized the importance of building a comprehensive dossier that would withstand scrutiny in court or administrative hearings. This involved gathering transaction records from the retirement fund, obtaining bank statements that reflected the unauthorized withdrawals, and documenting the social media posts with timestamps and public reactions. We also planned to secure hospital records, proving my incapacitation during the relevant time frame, reinforcing my inability to consent to any financial or legal decisions. Margaret's miscalculations gave us distinct leverage. By acting unilaterally and publicly, She exposed herself to claims of breach of fiduciary duty, an obligation she held as my spouse and a joint asset holder. Her attempt to claim disability benefits without meeting the insurance company's criteria created a separate line of legal vulnerability. Together, these breaches formed a multifaceted case that could be pursued through both civil litigation and regulatory channels. In essence, Margaret's motivation, driven by greed and impatience, had led her to underestimate the robustness of the legal and financial protections I had established. Her actions were reckless and ill-informed, but they also revealed the full extent of her intent to seize control of our shared resources swiftly. My professional experience and strategic mindset told me that this was not just a personal betrayal. It was a complex challenge that required a nuanced and disciplined response. I was determined not to let this situation spiral into chaos or emotional turmoil. Instead, I focused on harnessing my years of project management skills, meticulous documentation, systematic analysis, and strategic planning to counteract Margaret's maneuvers. My goal was clear: to dismantle her fraudulent claims methodically and reclaim what was rightfully mine, all while maintaining a professional demeanor and adhering strictly to legal protocols. This phase marked a turning point. While Margaret moved aggressively to finalize our separation and access funds, I was assembling the legal framework that would ultimately hold her accountable. The stakes were high, but the path forward was defined by evidence, law, and disciplined execution. With David Cole by my side, I was prepared to confront this betrayal not as a victim, but as a calculated professional ready to defend my rights strategically and effectively. After regaining enough clarity to absorb the gravity of the situation, I immediately shifted into analytical mode. My first task was to comprehensively review every piece of evidence available, starting with hospital records, social media posts, and bank statements. Each document was a critical puzzle piece, representing a distinct facet of Margaret's betrayal. I needed to understand not just what happened, but precisely when and how, to build an irrefutable timeline and identify legal violations. Accessing my hospital records was straightforward, but essential. The ICU admission logs detailed my date and time of arrival, the nature of my injuries, and the medical interventions performed. These records unequivocally proved my incapacitation period, demonstrating that I was physically and mentally unable to participate in any financial or legal decisions during that time. This would be critical in invalidating any signatures or authorizations purportedly made by me while hospitalized. The records also included notes from attending physicians highlighting my unconscious state for the first several days, reinforcing my non-involvement. Next, I meticulously compiled screenshots of Margaret's social media post announcing our divorce. The post's timestamp aligned with the early days of my ICU admission, underscoring the calculated timing. I documented the post's content and public reactions, including comments and shares, which amplified the message and framed the narrative in her favor. This public declaration wasn't just a personal affront. It was a strategic move affecting perceptions among our family, friends, and broader social circles. I cataloged every element with metadata to preserve authenticity and prevent any claims of tampering. Turning to financial documentation, I obtained detailed bank statements and retirement fund transaction records from the trustee. These documents exposed the full scope of Margaret's unauthorized actions, a complete liquidation of our joint retirement fund totaling $312,000. The withdrawal was executed without my consent, violating both the fund's internal controls and the explicit terms of our prenuptial agreement. I noted the date of the transaction coincided suspiciously with my hospital admission, confirming her exploitation of my incapacitation. Analyzing the prenuptial agreement, I highlighted clauses strictly prohibiting unilateral liquidation or transfer of joint assets without mutual consent. The language was clear and legally binding. Margaret's actions were not only a breach of trust, but constituted a contractual violation with fiduciary implications. This breach opened avenues for legal recourse, including demands for restitution and damages. In parallel, I examined the disability insurance policy with a fine-tooth comb. The policy required continuous employment verification and claimant participation throughout the claims process. Margaret had attempted to claim $48,500 on my behalf while I was incapacitated, submitting documents that lacked the mandatory employment certifications. I flagged this as potential insurance fraud and documented the policy terms to support this allegation. Cross-referencing all data, I constructed a comprehensive incident timeline: my unconscious admission, Margaret's social media announcement, the retirement fund liquidation, and the disability claim submission. The sequence underscored a coordinated effort to capitalize on my vulnerability. I noted how each action violated distinct legal and contractual safeguards, creating multiple points of leverage. Throughout this process, I maintained a detailed evidence log, categorizing documents by type, date, source, and relevance. I applied version control to digital files and created encrypted backups to safeguard against loss or tampering. This professional-grade documentation framework would underpin any legal proceedings, ensuring clarity and credibility. Recognizing the multi-jurisdictional complexity, spanning family law, contract law, and insurance regulations, I knew I needed specialized legal counsel. I briefed David Cole with this dossier, emphasizing the interconnected nature of the violations and the strength of the documented evidence. Together, we identified the key legal infractions: breach of fiduciary duty via unauthorized retirement fund withdrawal, fraudulent insurance claim submission, and potential defamation arising from the social media post's public declarations. Importantly, the social media evidence also undermined Margaret's credibility. Her public divorce announcement, timed strategically during my incapacitation, could be framed legally as an act of bad faith aimed at coercion and reputational damage. This added a valuable dimension to our case, beyond mere financial recovery. As I assembled these findings, I remained focused on the objective: to methodically dismantle Margaret's claims while preserving professional composure. I avoided emotional reaction, instead treating this as a complex project requiring systematic problem-solving. Every document reviewed, every timestamp verified, and every clause interpreted was a step toward restoring control over my personal and financial affairs. In summary, the full scope of Margaret's betrayal was now clear. An orchestrated, unauthorized liquidation of $312,000 in joint retirement assets, an attempted fraudulent disability claim for $48,500, and a public social media divorce announcement designed to preempt legal protocols and damage my reputation. Each violation was supported by concrete, time-stamped evidence and contractual documentation. I was in possession of a robust evidentiary foundation from which to pursue legal remedies with confidence. The next phase would be strategic planning with my legal counsel to convert this evidence into actionable legal steps. After assembling the initial evidence and assessing the scope of Margaret's actions, I knew the next step was to engage legal expertise to navigate the complexity of this situation. I scheduled a formal consultation with David Cole, an employment and family law attorney whose reputation for meticulous legal strategy and comprehensive case preparation was well known among my professional network. David's experience with marital asset disputes and insurance claim litigation made him the ideal partner to help me systematically address the multiple facets of Margaret's betrayal. Prior to our meeting, I organized all the relevant documentation into a chronological indexed file system. This was not just a matter of convenience. It was a deliberate strategy to present a clear, indisputable narrative, supported by incontrovertible evidence. I categorized each document by type and date, ensuring that both David and I could trace every transaction and communication back to its source without ambiguity. The categories included retirement fund withdrawal records, social media post screenshots, prenuptial agreement clauses, insurance policy details, and hospital admission logs. The retirement fund withdrawal records were particularly critical. I obtained detailed statements from the fund's trustee showing the exact dates and amounts of transactions. Every withdrawal was time-stamped and included account numbers and authorization codes. I annotated each item with notes referencing the prenuptial agreement's explicit prohibition against unilateral asset liquidation, creating a direct link between the financial data and the contractual obligations Margaret had violated. Next, I compiled comprehensive screenshots of Margaret's social media divorce announcement. I included metadata, such as timestamps, geolocation tags, and public reaction metrics, likes, shares, and comments, captured in their original format to preserve digital integrity. This public declaration formed a key piece of evidence demonstrating how Margaret attempted to shape public perception and exert coercion by circumventing formal legal channels. I prepared a detailed summary of the post's content alongside an analysis of its potential defamatory impact. I also gathered the complete text of our prenuptial agreement, highlighting clauses pertinent to asset management, fiduciary duties, and dispute resolution mechanisms. The agreement was drafted with precise legal language, and I ensured that all annotations referenced corresponding financial transactions and insurance claims. This cross-referenced document served as the backbone of our legal argument, illustrating the binding nature of these terms and Margaret's clear breach. Regarding the disability insurance policy, I secured the full contract and claims process documentation from our insurer. This included eligibility criteria, employment verification procedures, and claimant obligations. I flagged sections outlining the necessity of continuous employment and claimant participation, which Margaret failed to provide during her fraudulent claim attempt. I also assembled correspondence between Margaret and the insurance company, revealing inconsistencies and incomplete submissions on her part. Crucially, I obtained hospital ICU admission logs and medical records confirming my incapacitation dates and clinical status. These official documents detailed my unconscious state, inability to consent, and the timeline during which Margaret executed her financial and social media actions. This medical evidence was vital to disprove any claims of my authorization or involvement, underpinning the invalidity of her unilateral decisions. In addition to documentary evidence, I compiled witness statements from close friends and colleagues who were aware of my hospitalization and Margaret's sudden announcement. These statements corroborated the timeline and provided context regarding Margaret's behavior and motives. I ensured that each witness account was sworn and notarized, strengthening their admissibility and credibility in legal proceedings. During the consultation, I presented this meticulously organized dossier to David. We reviewed each document in detail, discussing legal ramifications and identifying the most actionable items. David emphasized the importance of preserving a strict chain of custody for all evidence, advising me to implement secure digital backups and maintain logs of document access and handling. He also recommended securing expert testimonies from financial advisors and IT security specialists to validate the authenticity and sequence of digital transactions and communications. Together, we mapped out a comprehensive legal strategy. The initial focus would be on sending formal notices to the retirement fund trustees, demanding immediate suspension of further disbursements and initiation of fund recovery procedures. Concurrently, we plan to notify the insurance company of potential fraud and request an internal investigation into Margaret's claim submissions. David also prepared to draft a civil complaint alleging breach of fiduciary duty, contract violations, fraud, and defamation stemming from the social media post. Throughout this process, I maintained professional composure, treating this as a complex project requiring systematic execution rather than a personal vendetta. My approach mirrored the project management principles I had refined over 15 years: clear objectives, detailed planning, risk assessment, and controlled communication through legal channels. By the end of this phase, I had transformed a deeply personal betrayal into a structured, evidence-based legal challenge. The groundwork was laid for coordinated action against Margaret's overreach, with all documents, records, and testimonies aligned to support our claims. The strategic assembly of these resources ensured that every step moving forward would be backed by indisputable proof and legal rigor, setting the stage for the consequential phases ahead. When I handed over the meticulously compiled dossier to David Cole, I knew the gravity of the situation demanded nothing less than a thorough and strategic legal dissection. David, a seasoned attorney with extensive experience in employment and family law, immediately recognized the multifaceted nature of Margaret's breaches. Together, we began a granular review of every piece of evidence, focusing on how each legal and contractual element interlocked to reveal a clear pattern of violations. Starting with the retirement fund withdrawal records, David scrutinized the transaction details, dates, authorization codes, and the chain of approvals recorded by the fund's trustee. It was immediately apparent that the complete liquidation of $312,000 had occurred without my knowledge or consent. This was a direct and explicit violation of the prenuptial agreement we had crafted years earlier. The agreement's clauses were unambiguous. Neither party could unilaterally liquidate or transfer joint assets without mutual written consent. Margaret's actions contravened these contractual terms and constituted a breach of fiduciary duty owed to me as her spouse and co-beneficiary of the fund. David flagged this as a significant legal infraction with strong potential for asset recovery claims. Moving to the disability insurance component, David methodically analyzed the policy's requirements. The contract stipulated continuous verification of employment status and claimant participation throughout the claim process, a safeguard to prevent fraudulent or unsupported claims. Margaret's submission lacked the necessary documentation, especially the critical employment verification forms and periodic claimant updates mandated by the insurer. This incomplete and improperly filed claim amounted to attempted insurance fraud. David noted that this breach wasn't just a contractual violation, but could escalate to regulatory scrutiny by insurance oversight bodies. The repercussions for Margaret could extend beyond civil litigation into criminal or administrative penalties. David also reviewed the social media content Margaret had posted. While initially framed as a personal statement, the timing and tone of the public divorce announcement suggested strategic intent to manipulate public perception and pressure me into premature acceptance of the separation. The post's phrasing, "Life's too short to wait for someone who might not make it," could be construed as defamatory and bad faith conduct designed to coerce and defame. David emphasized that this aspect of the case could support claims for reputational damages and influence the court's view of Margaret's overall conduct. To buttress our legal position, David advocated for formal complaints and legal filings that would systematically address each violation. We prepared demands to the retirement fund trustees to freeze any further disbursements and initiate recovery of the withdrawn funds. We drafted notification letters to the insurance company detailing the fraudulent nature of the disability claim and requesting an immediate internal investigation. On the civil litigation front, David began outlining a complaint encompassing breach of fiduciary duty, contract violation, insurance fraud, and defamation, framing our case around the irrefutable documentary evidence. Understanding the importance of technical validation, David recommended securing expert testimonies. We arranged for financial advisors to audit the retirement fund transactions, verifying the unauthorized withdrawal and its impact on the fund's integrity. Additionally, IT security consultants were engaged to authenticate the digital evidence, social media posts, transaction logs, and email correspondences, ensuring the chain of custody and forensic soundness of our documentation. Throughout this phase, I maintained a disciplined project manager mindset, tracking every document, timestamp, and correspondence with precision. David and I established strict protocols for evidence handling, including encrypted backups and access logs to preserve integrity and admissibility. Every legal motion was drafted with exacting care, emphasizing clarity, chronology, and contractual references. The strategic approach was clear: dismantle Margaret's claims through comprehensive legal challenge, backed by incontrovertible evidence and expert validation. This was not a personal vendetta, but a calculated defense of my rights and assets, executed with the same rigor. I applied to leading complex IT projects. The foundation was laid. Next steps would involve formal legal action and coordinated pressure to reverse the damage inflicted during my incapacitation. Once David and I finalized the legal strategy, we moved decisively to initiate formal actions against Margaret's unauthorized and fraudulent activities. Our first step was to prepare and serve her with comprehensive legal notices. These documents explicitly demanded immediate repayment of the full $312,000 withdrawn from the retirement fund, along with cessation of any further attempts to claim disability benefits fraudulently on my behalf. The notice carefully referenced the prenuptial agreement's clauses prohibiting unilateral asset liquidation and detailed the contractual violations she committed. It also included formal warnings regarding the legal consequences of ongoing defamation linked to her public social media divorce announcement. Simultaneously, David coordinated with the retirement fund trustees to implement protective measures over the remaining assets. We provided the trustees with the evidence dossier, including transaction records and the prenuptial agreement excerpts, highlighting how Margaret's actions breached fiduciary duties and violated internal fund governance policies. Within days, the trustees froze all disbursements related to my retirement account pending a full investigation. This move was critical to prevent any further unauthorized withdrawals or transfers, effectively safeguarding what remained of our joint assets from further depletion. Parallel to these efforts, we formally notified the disability insurance carrier of suspected fraudulent claims. We submitted a detailed complaint supported by policy documentation and proof of my incapacitation, underscoring Margaret's failure to meet the explicit employment verification and claimant engagement requirements. The insurer promptly suspended all disability benefit payments while initiating an internal fraud investigation. This suspension was a decisive blow against Margaret's attempt to access $4,500 in benefits without legitimate grounds. Understanding the importance of preserving my professional standing and ongoing employment benefits during this turbulent period, I proactively informed Meridian Tech's human resources and legal departments. I provided them with a thorough briefing on the situation, including copies of the legal notices served to Margaret and summaries of the pending litigation. This preemptive communication ensured that the company recognized my active employment status and was aware of the fraudulent claims Margaret had attempted to assert. HR confirmed that my position and benefits would remain fully intact, nullifying any adverse impact stemming from Margaret's misinformation. Throughout this phase, I was meticulous about maintaining all communication strictly through David and his legal team. I responded to Margaret's attempts to contact me only via counsel, emphasizing professional boundaries and legal protocol. Every interaction, written or verbal, was logged with date-stamped records to preserve a clear chain of custody for evidence. This disciplined approach not only mitigated risks of misinterpretation, but also established a pattern of documented compliance on my part, reinforcing our case should disputes arise about communication conduct. Margaret, seemingly unaware of the extent of our coordinated legal and financial countermeasures, proceeded as though her unilateral actions would remain uncontested. She continued posting on social media and pursued her claims with an unfounded confidence. However, behind the scenes, the freezing of the retirement fund and suspension of insurance benefits began applying systematic pressure. The trustees' freeze signaled to financial institutions and regulatory bodies that a serious legal dispute was underway. The insurance company's investigation elevated the risk of regulatory scrutiny and potential penalties against her. I remained professionally composed, approaching this confrontation as I would any complex project crisis, with careful coordination, measured communication, and strict adherence to established processes. Recognizing that this was a multi-layered legal and financial challenge, I resisted any temptation to engage emotionally or publicly. Instead, I focused on strengthening our evidentiary foundation, preparing for the next phases of litigation and recovery. This phase of serving legal notices and activating institutional safeguards was pivotal. It transformed the situation from a private betrayal into an active, formal dispute governed by contractual and regulatory frameworks. The trustees' and insurers' responses validated the strength of our evidence and underscored the seriousness of Margaret's breaches. By systematically leveraging these institutional mechanisms, David and I positioned ourselves to exert controlled pressure on Margaret, constraining her options and limiting her ability to further exploit the situation. In summary, the delivery of formal legal demands, the freezing of retirement fund disbursements, the suspension of fraudulent disability claims, and the preemptive involvement of my employer collectively established a comprehensive, multi-pronged containment strategy. This strategy curtailed Margaret's unauthorized financial access and preserved my professional standing. Though the immediate threat was mitigated, the unfolding legal and administrative processes promised to escalate the situation, setting the stage for consequential developments. My role was clear: maintain professional discipline, monitor institutional responses, and coordinate closely with David to drive the case forward with precision and resolve. Once the legal notices were served and the trustees notified, the institutional responses came swiftly and decisively. Within a week, the retirement fund trustees reversed the unauthorized $312,000 withdrawal. Their fiduciary responsibility compelled immediate action upon receiving our detailed complaint and supporting documentation, including transaction records and the relevant prenuptial clauses. This reversal was critical. It not only restored the funds but also sent a clear signal that unilateral asset liquidation without joint consent would not be tolerated. The trustees' intervention effectively froze Margaret's access to these substantial financial resources, directly undermining her ability to leverage the fund for personal gain. This financial setback triggered visible signs of instability in Margaret's position. As she suddenly faced the reality that the fund was no longer liquidated and accessible, her previously confident demeanor shifted. I monitored communications through our legal channels and was informed by David that Margaret's financial advisors reported increased anxiety and uncertainty about her liquidity and financial planning. This was a pivotal moment. The reversal of the fund withdrawal disrupted her immediate financial strategy and limited her capacity to pursue further unauthorized transactions. Simultaneously, I was informed that the insurance company had launched a comprehensive internal investigation into the disability benefit claim Margaret had submitted on my behalf. Upon receiving the fraud notice from our legal team, the insurer suspended all disability benefit payments pending a detailed review. This suspension cut off $48,000 of $500 in potential benefits that Margaret had attempted to claim fraudulently. The insurance company's compliance team meticulously examined the documentation submitted by Margaret, quickly identifying the absence of required employment verification and claimant participation. This breach of policy protocols not only invalidated the claim, but opened Margaret to possible regulatory sanctions for insurance fraud. At the same time, Meridian Tech's human resources and legal departments formally confirmed my active employment status and ongoing eligibility for disability and other employee benefits. Providing them with legal correspondence and evidence underscored the fraudulent nature of Margaret's claims and safeguarded my position within the company. KHR's official communication clarified that I remained a full-time employee, contrary to Margaret's assertions, effectively nullifying any attempts she made to undermine my employment status or benefits through misinformation. This proactive step was essential to prevent collateral damage to my professional reputation and financial security during an already challenging period. Margaret's social media narrative, once a source of widespread public sympathy for her, began to unravel under closer scrutiny. The evidentiary dossier highlighted the timing of her public divorce announcement coinciding precisely with my ICU admission. This correlation raised questions about the sincerity and legality of her claims, especially since the announcement appeared designed to influence public perception and pressure me into acquiescence. As media outlets and social circles reviewed the timeline and legal facts, her credibility eroded rapidly. The social media posts increasingly attracted criticism for their misleading nature, weakening her position both publicly and legally. Margaret's desperation became evident through her subsequent actions. Our legal counsel relayed a series of communications she initiated, requesting meetings and financial assistance. Each inquiry was handled with professional restraint. I directed all communications through David to ensure a consistent legal posture and avoid any inadvertent admissions or concessions. Declining her requests firmly but politely, I emphasized that all negotiations and discussions would proceed strictly through legal channels. Maintaining this boundary was crucial to preserving the integrity of our case and preventing emotional entanglement that could jeopardize our strategic advantage. Throughout this period, I maintained a disciplined approach, continuing to document every interaction, legal filing, and institutional response with the same rigor that guided my professional projects. Digital logs were updated daily, capturing timestamps, sender and recipient information, and content summaries for every email and message. Physical records, letters, notices, and official responses were filed and cross-referenced with electronic copies to ensure redundancy and accessibility. This level of record-keeping reinforced the chain of custody and would be invaluable in court or regulatory hearings. Moreover, I coordinated closely with David to anticipate Margaret's possible next moves. Understanding her financial instability and eroding credibility, we prepared to escalate our legal actions if she attempted further unauthorized withdrawals, fraudulent claims, or public defamation. The groundwork was being laid for civil litigation and potential regulatory filings, but for the moment, the focus remained on reinforcing the containment established by the trustees and insurer. The systemic pressure applied through these institutional mechanisms began constraining Margaret's options significantly. Restricted from accessing the retirement fund, facing halted disability payments, and challenged on social media credibility, she encountered increasing difficulty sustaining her narrative and financial maneuvers. The coordinated responses from fund trustees, insurance investigators, employer HR, and legal counsel collectively dismantled the foundation of her claims and forced her into a reactive position. Despite the escalating pressure, I refrained from public statements or personal engagement, adhering strictly to professional and legal protocols. This discipline not only protected my reputation, but also prevented any missteps that could be exploited by Margaret or her counsel. I trusted the structured legal process to address these violations effectively, confident that the evidence and institutional support would drive resolution. In sum, the reversal of the unauthorized fund withdrawal was the first tangible milestone in reclaiming control over my financial affairs. The insurance company's fraud investigation further isolated Margaret's attempts to exploit the system. My employer's acknowledgement of my employment status neutralized her misinformation campaign. Together, these developments marked the systematic unraveling of Margaret's fraudulent actions and financial overreach, setting the stage for the subsequent legal escalation and recovery efforts that lay ahead. Once we had firmly established the legal foundation, David and I moved swiftly to escalate the matter by initiating a civil lawsuit seeking damages totaling $360,000. This figure combined the full amount of the retirement fund theft, $312,000, with additional claims for reputational harm and associated economic losses stemming from Margaret's defamatory social media announcement. Our civil complaint was meticulously drafted to address multiple legal violations: breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized asset liquidation, fraud related to the disability insurance claim, and defamation. The complaint outlined the sequence of events in precise chronological order, supported by the substantial evidentiary dossier we had compiled. David's approach was comprehensive and methodical. We framed the civil lawsuit not merely as a financial restitution claim, but as a broader assertion of my rights, emphasizing the multidimensional impact of Margaret's actions on my professional standing and personal well-being. The complaint detailed how the social media post was timed deliberately during my incapacitation to damage my reputation and coerce acceptance of unilateral divorce proceedings. This reputational damage claim was critical in highlighting the non-monetary harm inflicted, which would support compensatory damages in addition to the stolen funds. Parallel to filing the civil suit, we engaged regulatory authorities to investigate the potential insurance fraud. The disability insurance carrier, upon receiving our formal fraud notice, promptly opened an internal investigation. Our documentation clearly demonstrated that the submitted claim lacked the legally mandated employment verification and claimant cooperation. The insurer's compliance unit coordinated with state insurance regulators, escalating the matter to a formal inquiry. This regulatory dimension introduced the possibility of administrative penalties and criminal referral for Margaret, significantly elevating the stakes. To substantiate the financial aspects of our case, we retained expert financial advisors who conducted detailed audits of the retirement fund transactions. Their reports confirmed that the liquidation was unauthorized and violated fiduciary obligations. The advisors prepared formal affidavits attesting to the irregularities and financial harm incurred, strengthening our position in both civil and regulatory proceedings. Their testimony would carry substantial weight in court, particularly in quantifying the impact of the theft and validating the restitution claim. Simultaneously, we engaged IT security consultants to verify the authenticity and integrity of all digital evidence. This included forensic analysis of the social media posts, email correspondences, and transaction logs. The consultants confirmed that all metadata and timestamps were intact and unaltered, preserving the evidentiary chain of custody. Their expert validation preemptively countered any challenges regarding document authenticity that Margaret's legal team might raise. Throughout this phase, we maintained disciplined coordination of the multi-jurisdictional legal strategy. David and I established clear communication protocols to manage interactions with regulatory bodies, financial trustees, and expert witnesses. We systematically updated the case management system we had set up, tracking deadlines, filings, and responses to ensure no procedural oversights. This project management approach mirrored my professional methodology, emphasizing precision, accountability, and proactive risk mitigation. Margaret's legal counsel was formally served with the complaint and regulatory notices shortly after filing. Their initial response acknowledged receipt, but sought extensions for review, indicating recognition of the case's seriousness. However, attempts to negotiate early settlements were rebuffed by us, as our objective was full restitution and accountability rather than expedient compromise. We anticipated protracted litigation, but were confident in the robustness of our evidence and the soundness of our legal claims. I continued to monitor the situation with professional detachment, delegating communication to David while focusing on my recovery and work reintegration. I documented all developments meticulously, maintaining encrypted records of all legal documents, correspondence, and expert reports. This ongoing documentation was critical not only for the current litigation, but also for potential future proceedings, including appeals or regulatory hearings. The filing of the civil lawsuit and the initiation of regulatory investigations marked a decisive escalation in the battle to reclaim my rights and assets. These coordinated actions applied multi-layered legal pressure on Margaret, constricting her options and exposing her to significant financial and professional risks. Importantly, this phase set the stage for subsequent enforcement actions, discovery processes, and evidentiary hearings that would further consolidate our position. While the formal legal process commenced, I remained vigilant against potential retaliatory tactics by Margaret, including attempts to undermine my credibility or delay proceedings. David advised on precautionary measures, including injunctions and protective orders, to safeguard against harassment or interference. These legal safeguards would become instrumental in maintaining control over the case's trajectory. In summary, by simultaneously pursuing civil litigation and regulatory investigations, we constructed a comprehensive legal net to systematically dismantle Margaret's fraudulent claims and asset misappropriation. The integration of expert testimonies and forensic validations fortified our position, ensuring that the evidence was not only compelling, but impervious to challenge. This measured strategic escalation represented the logical next phase in a carefully orchestrated process of reclaiming control over my financial and professional life. Following the initiation of the civil lawsuit and regulatory inquiries, Margaret's professional fallout accelerated rapidly, compounding the legal and financial pressures she faced. Due to her role as a financial consultant, one requiring strict adherence to ethical standards and fiduciary responsibility, the revelations from our investigation dealt a devastating blow to her career. Upon learning of the ongoing legal proceedings and the substantive evidence detailing her unauthorized liquidation of joint assets, fraudulent disability claims, and associated misconduct, her employer commenced an internal ethics review aligned with industry compliance protocols. The Ethics Committee's investigation was thorough. They examined the documented evidence we had compiled, including transaction records directly linking Margaret to unauthorized fund withdrawals and fraudulent insurance submissions. Given her profession's regulatory environment, which demands transparency, trustworthiness, and compliance with fiduciary duties, the findings were unequivocal. Margaret had breached fundamental ethical obligations, betraying both client trust and professional codes of conduct. The committee concluded that her actions represented serious misconduct, incompatible with her responsibilities as a financial consultant. Consequently, Margaret faced immediate termination from her role, The official dismissal letter cited violations of ethical standards and breach of fiduciary duty, referencing the ongoing litigation as substantiating evidence. This termination significantly impaired her professional credibility and standing in the financial services community. Given the interconnected nature of her client relationships, colleagues, and industry networks, the news spread quickly, triggering a cascade of reputational damage. Media outlets specializing in financial industry news and consumer protection stories soon picked up the story. They framed her case within a broader narrative of financial fraud and spousal asset disputes, highlighting the complexities professionals face when personal and financial lives intersect. Reports detailed how a senior IT project manager's strategic and methodical approach had exposed fraudulent actions by his spouse during his incapacitation, emphasizing the importance of contractual safeguards and documentation. This coverage amplified public scrutiny and further eroded Margaret's professional reputation. The media attention also had direct professional consequences for Margaret. Client trust, a critical asset in the financial consulting business, diminished sharply as existing and prospective clients reconsidered their engagements. Industry associations, concerned about maintaining standards, suspended her memberships pending further review. Her attempts to maintain or rebuild client relationships were met with skepticism, and many accounts were terminated or redirected to other consultants. The financial strain from lost income and mounting legal costs compounded her difficulties, forcing her to liquidate personal assets to cover immediate expenses. Meanwhile, the ongoing divorce proceedings reflected these developments. The court, informed by the extensive documentation and legal arguments presented by my counsel, ruled decisively in my favor regarding the division of marital assets. The judgment awarded me full control of the remaining assets, including the restoration of the $312,000 retirement fund and an additional $85,000 in legal fees and compensatory damages. This ruling underscored the court's recognition of Margaret's breaches and the resultant harm inflicted. Furthermore, the insurance company, having completed its internal fraud investigation, formally revoked Margaret's disability claims. The insurer reported her actions to fraud monitoring agencies and regulatory bodies, escalating potential sanctions beyond civil litigation. This revocation not only nullified her attempt to access $8,500 in benefits, but also introduced the possibility of criminal investigation, adding further legal jeopardy. Faced with these mounting pressures, legal, financial, and professional, Margaret's options became severely constrained. The cumulative impact disrupted her financial stability and professional prospects. Meanwhile, I began leveraging the regained assets and legal victories to rebuild my financial security and professional trajectory, confident that the systematic, evidence-based approach we implemented would continue to safeguard my interests. Throughout this period, I maintained a disciplined professional stance. I avoided public commentary beyond necessary legal disclosures, focusing instead on ensuring all interactions occurred through counsel. This approach preserved my reputation and prevented any missteps that could be leveraged against me. The combination of legal rigor, strategic communication, and unwavering documentation created a robust defense and a platform for recovery. In essence, Margaret's professional undoing was an inevitable consequence of the methodical legal and financial countermeasures we executed. By exposing her ethical breaches and fraudulent conduct, we triggered a domino effect of institutional responses, from employer termination to media scrutiny and regulatory sanctions, that collectively dismantled her career and secured restitution. This phase of the process highlighted the critical role of professional standards enforcement and public accountability in addressing personal betrayals with legal precision. The culmination of our legal efforts resulted in a court judgment awarding me a total of $398,500. This sum encompassed the full restitution of the $312,000 unauthorized retirement fund withdrawal, denial of the $48,500 fraudulent disability claim, and an additional $38,000 in compensatory damages for reputational harm and emotional distress caused by Margaret's public actions. Every dollar was meticulously calculated and supported by the voluminous documentation we had compiled: transaction records, insurance policy texts, hospital admission proofs, and social media archives. The court's decision also included imposing regulatory fines totaling $25,000 on Margaret, levied by the state's Financial Oversight Authority. These fines were a direct consequence of her breaches of fiduciary duty and the insurance fraud investigation initiated by the insurer's compliance department. The regulatory penalties underscored the seriousness with which professional misconduct and fraudulent claims are treated within the financial and insurance sectors, serving as both punishment and deterrent. Margaret's professional standing suffered further irreversible damage. The financial consulting industry blacklisted her following the public disclosure of her ethical violations. Industry associations formally revoked her memberships, citing breaches of trust and fiduciary responsibility vital to the profession's integrity. Client trust evaporated almost entirely. Many of her accounts were reassigned to other consultants, and potential new clients declined to engage with her. These consequences created a cascading effect on her career viability, making it increasingly difficult for her to maintain a foothold in the financial advisory community. Meanwhile, I secured several professional and financial recoveries that reinforced my stability. Meridian Tech provided severance payments, recognizing the undue hardship caused during my incapacitation and ongoing legal battle. Additionally, my retirement benefits were fully reinstated with interest, restoring not only the principal amount, but also compensating for lost growth due to the forced liquidation. Further, I negotiated the transfer of intellectual property rights related to joint investments Margaret had attempted to claim, thus safeguarding valuable assets accrued through years of collaborative efforts. The case's significance extended beyond personal restitution. Industry forums and professional legal seminars began citing our litigation as a benchmark for protecting professionals against spousal financial exploitation. Presentations emphasized the critical importance of comprehensive documentation, proactive legal safeguards such as prenuptial agreements, and the necessity of expert legal counsel when navigating complex marital and financial disputes. Our experience reinforced the message that strategic patience, systematic evidence gathering, and coordinated legal action could effectively counteract even the most calculated betrayals. Reflecting on the process, the court's ruling and regulatory sanctions were not merely victories in a legal sense, but affirmations of a professional approach grounded in discipline and thoroughness. Each element of the final judgment reflected the strategic planning, rigorous documentation, and methodical execution that had marked my response from the outset. This outcome demonstrated how combining technical expertise with legal acumen could restore justice and ensure long-term protection of personal and financial interests. While the judgment resolved immediate financial damages, the broader professional and regulatory implications continued to echo. Margaret's blacklisting and the associated reputational fallout served as a cautionary tale within the financial consulting community, reinforcing ethical standards and the consequences of violating fiduciary duties. At the same time, the reinstatement of my retirement benefits and severance payments provided tangible stability and affirmed my professional contributions and standing. Throughout this phase, I maintained strict control over all communications, delegating legal discussions to David and refraining from public commentary. This discipline prevented unnecessary distractions and preserved the integrity of the legal process. I continued to update and secure all records, ensuring readiness for any potential appeals or enforcement actions. This methodical posture was vital in sustaining momentum and consolidating gains as the case progressed toward final resolution. The judgment and regulatory findings also underscored the interplay between civil litigation and administrative enforcement in addressing complex financial and familial disputes. Civil courts addressed restitution and damages, while regulatory bodies imposed fines and professional sanctions, creating a comprehensive accountability framework. This multidimensional approach amplified the consequences for Margaret and reinforced the protections available to wronged professionals. In summary, the court awarded restitution and damages, combined with regulatory fines and professional sanctions, represented a decisive turning point in reclaiming control over my financial and professional life. The systemic dismantling of Margaret's fraudulent claims and unethical conduct was the product of sustained evidence-driven legal strategy and professional discipline. This phase of the process not only secured financial redress, but set a precedent for industry-wide awareness of spousal financial exploitation and the critical role of legal preparedness and documentation in combating it. As my physical recovery progressed and I regained full capacity, the focus naturally shifted toward rebuilding, not just my personal finances, but also my professional trajectory. After the exhaustive legal battles and the painstaking reclamation of both assets and reputation, I was positioned to leverage my enhanced standing rather than simply return to the status quo. One opportunity that emerged was an offer for a senior IT director role at a direct competitor to Meridian Tech. The position not only represented a substantial career promotion, but also reflected recognition of my resilience and expertise during an exceptionally challenging period. The offer included a 20% salary increase over my previous compensation, along with equity options tied to the company's future growth. This package validated the value of my professional portfolio, the complex projects I had led, the revenue I had generated, and the strategic acumen I demonstrated throughout the crisis. Importantly, this new role granted me an expanded leadership mandate, overseeing multiple project teams, managing higher-stakes cybersecurity initiatives, and influencing corporate IT strategy at an executive level. Accepting this position was a deliberate, calculated decision, grounded in professional growth and stability. Parallel to transitioning into the new corporate role, I launched a consulting practice specializing in IT risk management. This venture leveraged my deep experience in cybersecurity frameworks, regulatory compliance, and project governance. The consulting practice was designed to advise clients on mitigating technological risks and safeguarding their data infrastructures, skills I had honed extensively during my 15-year tenure and tested under pressure during my personal ordeal. This entrepreneurial step diversified my income streams and reinforced my professional independence. Looking back on the ordeal from a professional perspective, I recognize that my strategic patience and rigorous adherence to documentation were pivotal. Rather than reacting impulsively to Margaret's betrayal, I applied the same principles that had guided my career success: methodical evidence gathering, disciplined communication, and a focus on legal protections. This approach not only ensured justice, but also preserved my professional integrity throughout the process. The experience reinforced a vital lesson. In situations of personal and financial crisis, especially those involving intertwined legal, financial, and emotional complexities, maintaining a calm, systematic approach is essential. Emotional responses, while natural, can cloud judgment and jeopardize long-term outcomes. By contrast, a measured, fact-based strategy, supported by thorough documentation and expert legal counsel, creates a foundation for effective resolution and future resilience. Moreover, the ordeal strengthened my belief in the power of foresight and preparation. The prenuptial agreement, comprehensive financial record-keeping, and proactive legal consultation were not bureaucratic formalities, but critical safeguards. These elements proved indispensable in countering attempts to exploit my incapacitation and financial assets. Their existence underscored the importance of integrating professional standards into personal affairs, particularly for those with substantial financial or intellectual property at stake. As I settled into my new role and expanded consulting practice, I maintained a disciplined routine of documentation and legal vigilance. I updated contracts, reviewed insurance policies, and fortified data backups, applying lessons learned to prevent future vulnerabilities. This mindset extended beyond protecting myself. It became part of my consulting philosophy, advising clients on establishing similarly robust frameworks. Reflecting on the entire journey, I appreciate how professional competence transcends technical skill alone. It encompasses strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and the ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics with composure. The betrayal I endured was profound, but my response embodied the very essence of professionalism: calm analysis, systematic planning, and persistent execution. This chapter remains a powerful reminder that well-documented professionalism is not merely about career success. It is the best defense against personal and financial betrayal. By combining legal foresight with strategic patience, I was able to secure superior outcomes, both in reclaiming what was lost and in advancing my professional standing. My experience serves as a testament to the enduring value of discipline, preparation, and measured action when confronting even the most challenging adversities.